Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Jane Dutton. I'm one of the co-founders of the Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship, and I'm also the organizer of this series on how to be a positive leader. For those of you who haven't been to some of the earlier sessions, this session is one of several. It's actually the second to last in the series that we've been running all year, sort of built on this book about how to be a positive leader. And I'm really excited that Golden-Biddle is here. I'm going to introduce her in a minute. But I just want to do a couple of other sort of warm-up things. One of the first things, again, is to express gratitude to the Joneses, who, raise your hand, Diane and Paul, who everybody knows, who really for many years have supported Positive Links and have allowed us to dream much bigger about what this session can look like. And I want to welcome those of you who are listening to this we're live streaming this. This is, again, one of the things that the Joneses funding has allowed us to do. And we appreciate your presence for those who are here virtually. I also want to, before I say one thing about the center, I want to give you, as is tradition, a 1-minute connection opportunity. So, as is tradition, I'm going to ask you to turn to people or get up and stand and go build a connection to someone you don't know. And the thing is, my charge is to not just build any old connection. My charge is for you to build a high-quality connection in 45 seconds to someone that you don't know. And it's going to be chaotic, and that is great, because it's 4 o'clock and the energy needs to come up. So 45 seconds, go connect, high quality, go. Please stop connecting. Thank you. I always feel bad inviting you and then disconnecting you. But hopefully there's enough of a connection that you'll want to follow up and have a conversation with someone when we have our healthy snacks after this session. Just a word about the Center for Positive Organizations, and we've been trying lots of different ways to talk about it, and I am completely enamored with Chris White's, sort of one of his images of what the center is. So I'm just going to preview and try it out here. But the way Chris talks about the center is in terms of a triangle, kind of with 3 hubs, where you have researchers, leaders, and students, and you have this very vibrant, dynamic community that's at the intersection of these 3 stakeholders. And the way I like to think about it, the way Chris has helped me imagine it, therefore, is in this triangle there's a lot of generative dialogue. In this triangle, it's a type of engine for transformative knowledge creation. Traditional things like articles and books, but some things that are less traditional, like blogs or other new forms of social media types outcomes. So beyond being a site for generative dialogue, an engine for transformative knowledge creation, we also envision in this triangle that it's a deep reservoir of grounded hope, inspiration, and practical ideas for positive change around work and organizations. So that's my latest sort of communication about another way to think about what the center is. But now it's my opportunity, this is my favorite part, to introduce our speaker. Golden-Biddle is a longtime researcher and friend. She comes to us from Boston, my hometown. She's the Queston Professor of Management at Boston University, and it's particularly exciting right now because she's just stepping down from a very demanding dean job, associate dean job. If you're dean of research at a major university, that's a big job. You're basically managing all the faculty, which we know is a complicated job. And she's just about to be set loose, which means she's going to come back to being a full-time researcher and teacher. She's a prolific scholar, particularly in the area of organizational change and identity. She's also a well-known qualitative researcher, and I just have to pitch this. For those of you, any of you who are doing qualitative research, this is probably one of her best-known books called Composing Qualitative Research. Any doctoral student in any field that's doing qualitative research will read this book. But the way I got to dance with Karen most recently is we put together a book called Using a Positive Lens to Explore Social Change in Organizations. And you know, you have some of those projects that are, you sort of look at, they're kind of drudgery, and then you have those joyful projects. Doing this project with Karen, which brought together really diverse researchers who were studying social change in very different ways and invited them to kind of reinvent or rethink their work in terms of a positive lens, was an incredibly, I thought, creative and fun and I think productive collaboration. It never would have been done without Karen. She's just a wonderful colleague. And I think in doing that work, I got a little bit of a wisp of her evolving perspective on micromoves and their importance in how we understand how change is accomplished or how change gets done in organizations. So it's my total pleasure to introduce my wonderful colleague, Karen Golden-Biddle.
Wow, I think Jane gives the best introductions. Actually, that book conference that led to that book was one of the highlights of my professional career as well. Great, great colleagueship. So it is wonderful to be here. I've had an incredible day already. What energy in the Center for Positive Organizations. Amazing. And I think I've known it since 97, 98. Amazing, the number of people, both here presently as well as tuning in online. It's great. And I had an especially inspiring lunch with a group of the center's students known as Plus Lab. Are any of you here? A few of you might be here. Yes, very cool, right? And so please ask them what plusgram means. It was wonderful. Also, thanks to Diane and Paul very much. Had a great conversation in advance that fueled my thinking on micromoves, and I think Diane and I coined a new phrase. I'm a micro mover, so we're gonna kind of look at that. All right. We're going to today look at micromoves, and we're going to share a couple of examples around that and work those examples at the table of micromoves in discovery that did work, and we're going to kind of look at those to see how can they work and how did they work and how might we take those into our own organizations to adapt and to try them out. I'll start on the other side. Studies estimate that 70% of all change initiatives fail. Our traditional academic models of organizational change have offered few, if any, viable solutions to improve these statistics. Focusing on big strategies and particular sequences of action, they really overemphasize the origin of change as being by necessity exogenous, externally driven, and highly disruptive, disrupting people's lives, disrupting people's work, highly disruptive. And they portray the process of changing organizations as linear, implemented through top-down direction and very proscribed steps. As a result, our traditional models do not do justice to the critical human component of change. And they provide little, I might add little, precious little, guidance for positive leaders wishing to create change. There are some exceptions. The early work of Eleanor Ostrom and her colleagues demonstrates how humans can and do achieve very stable, self-governing entities that sustain ecological systems such as water basins. And the work of some organizational behavior scholars, many of whom are here at the Ross School, whose work in leadership, issue selling, and positive organizational scholarship draws important attention to how leaders' small actions have large and positive impact. My work enthusiastically joins this latter group, can you tell? And seeks to enrich our understanding about how people inside organizations work together, leaders frontline across the levels, to create and sustain changes that benefit patients, students, customers, clients, and our larger communities. In particular, it asks, in part because I'm just rotating off of a dean's role, how is this positive change achieved, especially in organizations such as healthcare or universities, when their external environments are in significant flux today, and their internal environments consist of very long-standing and often rigid subcultures of expertise. My research analyses and my recent experiences in creating change as a senior associate dean really point to the significance, and our conversations, every conversation with practitioners of change and thoughtful leaders of change, point to the significance of these more subtle and less disruptive actions enacted. And I call these micromoves. So what are micromoves? Micromoves, and think as we're talking about this about a time when you either enacted a micromove or that you had some really good micromove examples in change, and we'll get to that in just a minute, and I'll ask you to generate it at your table. Micromoves are those small and often barely noticeable patterns of action and interaction. In fact, when people engage in them, they're often invisible and they go unheralded. But they are the barely noticeable patterns of action and interaction that engage people meaningfully and respectfully for change. And they are consequential in generating collective enthusiasm and energy that builds palpable hope. You can sense it. When you walk into an organization, you know, you can feel it. Palpable hope and momentum. And now, in the spirit of Jane's introduction with you, when you created a high-quality connection in a short period of time, I'm going to ask you right now at your table to consider an experience of change in which you felt meaningfully engaged, and to think about one or two small actions that helped foster that engagement for you, and share that with your neighbors. We're going to take 2 minutes for this. 45 seconds or so, a minute for each person, all right? So think about a time and change and maybe one or two small actions that really brought you into that change. Go. So lots of different kinds of conversations going on as I wandered around. It's really the warm-up to thinking about micromoves is what this is. If we think about micromoves, and we're going to start to now delve into them, analyses from my studies and others that are grounded in researchers who've studied organizations through direct observation. They go in to study and they look and they watch the action. Really disclose what I'm calling 3 different groupings of micromoves that are oriented to the central work of achieving change. We can think about micromoves in many other ways. This is for the goal of achieving change, achieving desired change through insiders in an organization. Discovery is one grouping, collaboration is a second grouping, and sustainability is the third grouping. So discovery is about generating new and meaningful possibilities for change. So new possibilities, new lines of sight than we've thought about this before. That's what we're going to work today. There's also a second grouping, and there is some interdependence, obviously, collaboration. Collaboration is not opposed to competition, but collaboration is more about collective, about being able to work together across our differences, whatever those differences may be, to transform possibilities for change into reality. And then third, sustainability is about opening up institutional practices and systems to accommodate the change. So the notion is opening up, not merely adapting what we're doing to the existing institutional practices. So how do we make room for the new possibilities and the change? Today, as I said, we'll focus on the micromoves of discovery, which are critical for seeding transformation. And so we're going to work a couple of these examples of discovery moves, as I mentioned, very closely. We're going to do a couple things. We're going to examine them at the tables. So I'll share the stories, and then we're going to examine them by asking, what are they made up of? What are the pieces that together come together that make these patterns of action work? And what do they generate? right? What happens as a result of them. And second is to really explore how they could be adapted to foster change in our own organizations. So micromoves, let's move to micromoves of discovery. They challenge us to objectively see. So outside of us, they challenge us to objectively see and then prepare to let go of our traditional practices, our ways of interacting, and definitions of how we should go about our work. This is not easy to do. Yet letting go is central, and there's an example from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, who is challenging that organization to become better at innovation. In an early interview just after he was named CEO last year, he commented, "So how do you create that self-organizing capability to drive innovation and be focused?" Culturally, he said, "I think we've operated in Microsoft as if we had the formula figured out. And it was all about optimizing that formula and its various constituent parts. Now, however," he added, "it's about discovering the new formula." So discovery micromoves also ask us to become outward-facing to others, right? To our students, to our patients' experience, to our consumers, to the community, and forward-looking to new possibilities. So facing outward, for example, involves listening to our stakeholders and learning about their perspectives and experiences, accessing their experiences, and then importantly, using their input to prompt us to see more clearly what needs to be changed in our organizations. Right? So facing outward in this respect provokes us. It challenges us when we start this external outward facing to stop taking for granted how we do our work. As in the case of Microsoft, to stop acting as if they had the formula already figured out. Then forward-looking involves venturing forth beyond our comfort zones. Sometimes it's not comfortable. And notably venturing forth beyond our territorial fences to actively pursue new possibilities for changing. Transforming how we deliver patient care, redefining the model for innovation in business and industry, and redesigning our practices, perspectives, and vehicles of teaching and learning in universities. So our first example that I'm going to share is a fun example. And it takes place, and so it's the first example of the micromove of discovery. And so I'd like you to listen, and as I share this example, there are some wonderful, colorful note pages on the table, and I'd like you to jot down notes about two things, so I'd like you to listen for two areas. And then we're going to talk about those also at the tables. What piques your interest? What resonates for you in this example? What do you find interesting in the example? So generally, it's all about what resonates for you. That's the first one. And then second is, what clues do we get about what makes this micro-move effective in fostering discovery for change? So helping people see new possibilities, see new lines of sight, right? What makes this micro-move effective for discovery? So what interests us, totally up to you. And then also, what clues do we get about what makes this micro-move effective in fostering discovery? And again, there are micro gestures, there are small actions. We're looking for the pattern. What comprises, what goes into making up this micro-move? So this first example takes place in a school, elementary school, in Oakhurst, not Illinois, but a small village part of the city, Decatur, Georgia. At Oakhurst Elementary School, first grade classes undertook the project, all first grade classes undertook the project, titled, "What Can One Little Person Do?" I love that title when I started reading about that, I'm like, I got to know more about this. There's human agency, 5, 6 years old. I love it. They first, as part of this project, researched historical figures in America, paying attention to the contributions these people made to our country. Following on that research, they then asked the question that was going to guide the rest of their work: what contributions can I, as an individual student, and can we, as a first grade class, make to create, and I'm not kidding you, a positive change in our community? Stunning. Think about the transformative possibilities in this project when defined this way. To explore this, they researched differences of people in the community of Decatur, including vision, hearing, mobility, and learning differences. They invited experts into their classrooms to share their knowledge and experience about accommodations that people with differences might need in order to live and thrive in their community. Then the students ventured forth with their teachers into the community, guided by a recommended longtime resident and community volunteer who uses a wheelchair to get around. They saw firsthand what had been done and what needs yet to be changed to accommodate all residents and visitors in their community. As Nadia, one of the students, commented, we've been going on field trips to look for things in our community that we can change to make things better for people who have differences. Then in January of this year, they presented their findings and recommendations for change to the Decatur City Commission. Local changes that would make their community more accessible for all members. There's a Facebook page. They have a video. I would have loved to have shown it with more time. And each one of them is laughing, jumping, and noting their own differences as classes, the class members. At this presentation, during her time at the podium, a student named Watts reflected on the project. We have been learning about differences, she said, and what one little person can do. We're fixing stuff in downtown Oakhurst for people with differences. There are no ramps, so people with wheelchairs won't be able to get up on the sidewalk. It would really be difficult for them to live here if we don't make these changes. That was the closing statement. Stunning and inspirational. At your tables, I'd like you to work this story and work it around what resonates for you. And then also, what are the elements? What did they do? What small actions? What did maybe the teachers do to help make this happen? This is all one big micro move for discovery that is fueling the changes they're recommending. We're going to have about 4 or 5 minutes to have a conversation at our tables. I'll be circulating, just ignore me. I'm going to be listening, okay? Go. Thank you. It's so pleasing to the ears. Thank you all for engaging. I heard some very interesting pieces all the way from how did the teachers design this, and the teachers had to work together, as well as the city council had to agree to hear the students, right, all the way along. So there are pieces to this that are coordinated elements that fit together. And so if we think about this, and then what happened was it asks the students and teachers in the most general way to become outward-facing and forward-looking. The teachers needed to entertain the idea that they wouldn't stay in the classrooms only, right? And they would venture forth. So they heard others' experiences and their difficulties and used it to prompt an exploration of what needed to be changed, right, at the most general level. And they ventured forth, obviously. They could have stayed in their classroom. They could have read research on what do communities need to accommodate people with differences, right, and what was happening the most innovative. They went out to experience firsthand. Our second example comes from healthcare. Who in the room is in the healthcare area. Okay, so a fair number at each table. This is great. As I share this example, I'm going to ask you now to jot down notes, again, similar to this. One is what piques your interest, and also what makes this story, this example, as a micromove for discovery, effective in fostering discovery, in enabling discovery to happen. And this time, I'd like you to also imagine, in the what-if way possible, how you might adapt it for use in your organization. Are there pieces of it? Could you assemble aspects of it that would fit with some other things for discovery? Okay? Whether you're in healthcare or not. Okay. Transformation began at ThedaCare. ThedaCare is a hospital system in Wisconsin, not too far from here, when clinicians and administrators walked with real patients to experience firsthand the difficulties created by their system. To prepare, these clinicians and administrators generated open-ended questions to ask patients when they accompanied them what would illuminate their experiences. They actually had an OD consultant come in to do that, to help them. Questions such as, would you share with me what being a patient here is like? What was it like for you just now when X happened, as they were following them? Could you describe some other experiences you've had here as a patient? In addition to those questions, they decided to leave behind their medical frocks and suit jackets in order to slip out of their expert roles. As they walked with patients, the team was surprised to discover how very difficult the route through their care system was for many patients, and how truly arduous it was for the elderly and the very ill. They had no idea. They also discovered many other burdens patients faced, such as having to return at a later time to complete diagnostic tests. Who hasn't been asked to do that? Or having to repeatedly answer the same question as different providers came into the room. These clinicians and administrators realized that although individual services and units may work well, their whole system of care for the patient and the patient experience did not. A clinical leader commented, "We became acutely aware at a deeper level that the old process was oriented to justifying patients' stay in the hospital. We needed a different process, one focused on optimal recovery and helping patients get well." The result was a forward-thinking, innovative model of patient care delivery named collaborative care that led to exceptional patient and staff outcomes and international recognition. You can also read about it in Health Affairs special issue. Today, the physicians, the nurses work together across any territorial fences, and there's aftercare as well. And I'm glad to talk with anyone about this particular example. For us right now, it's the early stages of this and the discovery micromove. I'm going to ask you again to take 3 to 4 minutes or so at your table to share the pieces, like what really resonates with you with this very short example that I've shared, okay, in a healthcare system as they were trying to improve the delivery of their system. They gathered together to improve the delivery of their system and had no idea it would lead to seeing the whole system needing transformed. So what piques your interest? What makes this micromove effective in fostering discovery for change, and how might it be adapted for use in your organization? So these questions are up on the slide for your reference. Wow, some of the very interesting about ways that you're trying to adapt this for use in your own organization. And I do want to, there were a couple questions, did they decide to do that themselves? You know, were they, how agentic were they in this process? The group came together first. They are senior leaders, administrators, and senior clinicians. So they're over units, some of the clinicians, but they don't get to the front line often. What they did initially was walk the care path as if they were patients, right? And then realized there's some stuff that didn't quite fit. Something was niggling a little bit, like they needed to see more, and they made the decision to walk the care path with patients. Okay? So great conversations. I look forward as we continue this and also afterward for a conversation with you. If we think about this, and I'm going to link to some of the conversations I've heard, there are some design elements that come forward with a micromove of discovery that makes it effective. First of all, it's not existing out of context. There's a purpose that gives it meaning. I mean, you could walk with patients and not get a thing out of it, right? That's not what they did. So there's a purpose. It's enveloped in a purpose of improving care delivery, and they changed that purpose to transforming care delivery as they went through this process. There's also the importance of accessing patient experience directly. Right? In order to really understand the experiences, whether it's community members with differences, whether it's patients in the healthcare system, whether it's students and their learning path, to add it, there is an importance of accessing their experience, not putting our experience or expectations onto that experience. So they got out of their familiar roles and they spent time with the questions. Many of you talked about this, left their medical uniforms and suits behind, and then really did go to walk the care path with patients. So we're starting to see some design elements of micromoves that then have major impact. Right? So this is the discovery piece. There's many more kinds of things that went on in order for the collaborative care model to be developed, obviously. The CEO was right in the room with the clinicians and administrators. Okay? Clear congruence. So walking the care path with patients conveys a discovery micromove that enables groups to gain insight into previously invisible problems and foster momentum for change, the difficulties. There's one piece left. In this case, the team's decision to walk patients' paths led to at least 3 positive individual and organizational outcomes. And let me share those. First, it generated a new line of sight for clinical care. It moved it away from justifying, as the clinician talked about, justifying patient stay, which is a normal way of going about delivery, why they have to stay and why they can keep getting insurance, to helping patients get well. Major shift in line of sight for them. That really affected the design of the care system itself as they went forward, and they had teams together, physicians, nurses, social workers, and aftercare that huddled before they saw a patient. Second, it cultivated insiders' beliefs that their efforts could make a positive difference in improving care. They had hope that if they took action, it would matter. And it did matter. So that whole notion of hope that my action will matter. And that generated momentum to design the new care system. And it took a lot of work to design the care system. That momentum helped energize it. And finally, it did enable insider-led organizational change. These insiders designed and executed needed change in 2004, 2005, long before government changes in legislation that stretched, and they did it by stretching that organizational culture through the infusion of new ideas. They moved it. Culture became more malleable. that allowed them to, then they infused these new ideas. So I think I'm going to end on this piece of it and look forward to conversations and say, I hope today, from today's session, that all of us can gain an appreciation that micromoves are critical resources for positive leaders in change. In both examples of the discovery micromoves, people are meaningfully and respectfully engaged in what might be called expeditions of inquiry, whether it's into the community or with patients in the care system, into how to make a positive difference. They venture forth to see new possibilities for change. They see, touch, and hear, right? Sidewalks, they themselves stepped up to see they weren't accessible. They experience the difficulties of care paths. For change then that benefits patients, communities, and society. So on that notion, I would say micro moves do add up to macro impact, lasting change that knits together the best of the past with a desired alternative future that benefits all of us. Thank you. We were hoping that for questions. 5 minutes for questions? 4 minutes? I'll watch CJ back there. Yeah. All right. Questions? It's tough. And I know it. I see. Look, this is so wonderful. One of you had a micro move that generated the impact for everybody else to move. So would you like to start?
Sure. What is micro about these moves? Because they sound like very large initiatives that end up taking a lot of
Yeah, what's micro move is very much, that's a really great question. They have macro impact for sure. And what happens is, as we take micro moves, we might even think about it as experimenting, right? Can you imagine the teachers together saying, we want to do a project where our students will understand about agency, right? And then go out in the community and actually have the experience of creating change. So you can imagine the teachers huddling together, even thinking that is a micro move, right? Rather than, we're not able to do anything in this system, right? Around that. Now, notably, there is support for this kind of learning that really is catalyzing, right? So there's another group that are talking about expeditionary learning here in Michigan and elsewhere that's only in the elementary and maybe up to K through 12 maximum, right? That's kind of tapping in and helping give resources and resource these kinds of efforts, right? But getting the city commission to meet, those kinds of things, right? But, you know, a small move would be to ask the city commission to meet, right? Great question. I had that a couple times as we went around the tables. Great question. So we can think of these as micro moves that are kind of mini experiments to see whether there's traction, right? We don't know unless we try, right? Other questions? Yeah.
Can you hear my question?
Please repeat it again.
Okay, sure. So did you find measuring the impact of micro move difficult?
So I look forward to many, many more people measuring the impact of micro moves. Where I measure it right now, the metric I'm using is the palpable hope, the enthusiasm, the energy, and then the students are getting those projects implemented. It is a new model of care, right? And the interesting thing, when you start looking for positive change examples, there are a lot of them, right? They're just under the surface, and they may not be large scale, all of them, right? I chose some that are more large scale on purpose to show that it can have that kind of macro impact. Right? Yeah, but definitely look forward to other kinds of, and broadening our metrics, right, about what matters in terms of how do we measure that. There, I can tell you nurses are talking in this about, since graduation, they haven't been able to take hold of their profession as strongly as they're enabled to now, right? That's a metric, right? So these are really helping staff as well as patients and communities. Yeah. Yeah. Roger.
So as leaders, we presumably have a range of micro and macro moves that we could take in any given situation. How would you counter an argument that says, as a leader, a micro move is just not enough when you know something needs to happen? And how would you make that decision as a leader?
If we don't start with micro moves, we're not going to get to the macro impact. I mean, I think probably the micro moves, we don't know if it's not going to be enough until we try it, right? What we can do is we can really, now that there's a sense about micro moves, try it and see, has energy been generated? Is there momentum? Are others starting to talk about it? What reactions do I get, right? So that's kind of this mini experiment under the radar to see who picks it up. Now, there are some micro moves and things we may not pursue after that, right? But others that just kind of get moving. That's why I think the plusgram from the Plus Lab is such a great example that went into the Ross School. It's just wonderful. It moved, you could just tell its time was here, right? And they did a lot to make that happen, right, behind that. So you think about it as tentative testings, right? Tentative ways, because otherwise we won't know, right? So that's a helpful way, tentative ways moving forward. Yeah.
Okay, I have to stop you. You stay there. So I'm sure you're all feeling like I do. I'm going to formally thank Karen, and we'll all do some applause, and then I have 2 announcements I'd like to make. So first, as you know, we love artifacts.
Yes, I know. I was hoping that
symbols.
was
Symbols. You can take my little blinger if you want.
No,
like
it was this that I noticed.
Oh, okay. It's not a blinger, but I think I'm going to get one after I've seen how excited you are.
Yeah, I'm going to get my own, I think.
Okay,
it's a great small move to
This has a positive spiral. That's the image that's in it. But thank you so much for coming. And she's spending a couple of days here. So if anyone wants to follow up with a discussion, please join me in thanking Karen for coming.